Welcome to First Bite, our Detroit Lions midweek podcast where we bring in a very special guest to talk all things Detroit Lions. My name is Jeremy Reisman. I will be your co-host here for First Bite as we enter the penultimate episode, one of my favorite words to use, of our draft recap series. With me filling in for Ryan Matthews, who did indeed have a great baby, Chris Perfett, as the adequate host. And I'm kind of doing an adequate job here, stumbling over the co-hosting duties here because I'm off my game here.
We're sharing the adequacy today. Yes, I am now the adequate co-host. Ryan did have a great baby. Theodore is healthy and wonderful. You can go check out his pictures at Brian_POD. I'm doing well today, and I don't have much else to add.
Bama football. Roll Tide today.
Are we doing the Roll Tide?
We have to because we have reached, as I said, the penultimate episode.
Hold on a second. Let me go find a tree to poison.
Okay. As you may or may not know, we've been doing a draft recap series, bringing in a college beat writer from each of the Lions picks, going in reverse order. So now we are to the Lions' second first round pick. Next week, or maybe the week after, we're still working on the schedule. We'll do Aiden Hutchinson, but it's Jameson Williams week is what I'm getting to. And as always, we have a very special guest to talk about Jameson Williams. He is the senior recruiting analyst for BamaOnline.com, which is part of 24/7 Sports. He is the co-host of Talkin' Tide podcast. It's Travis Reier. Travis, thanks for joining us tonight.
How's it going, guys? Glad to be here.
Doing great.
Doing good.
Ready to jump into some Jameson Williams talk because it was one of the most exciting picks the Lions made on draft weekend. So let's start from the moment he landed at Alabama. I'd like to hear your kind of initial thoughts when learned he was entering the transfer portal and landing at Alabama. What I guess were the immediate expectations once Jameson Williams was part of the Rolling Tide?
Well, I think it was probably similar to what the Lions are going to expect of him up there, and that's going to be the ability to stretch the field vertically first and foremost, just his speed in general and how it can not only supplement an offense, both throwing the football and also helping you out in the run game, because he'll back some safeties up. If they want to creep up into the box and get nosy against the run game, he's capable of making the defenses pay. And I think that's what Alabama needed at the time. Alabama had just gone through 2021 spring drills, had just seen Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith leave the program, did return John Mechie. So there was a sense of security in knowing that if you needed a volume guy, maybe 100 catch guy, John Mechie could give you that. And that's essentially what he gave Alabama before his own injury in the SEC championship game. And so you needed that dynamic playmaker to go along with Mechie on the outside. And there had been a previous history there. That's one of the undervalued aspects of recruiting right now that probably isn't talked about enough. You're not just recruiting kids at the high school level for your upcoming class. You're recruiting them and you're trying to develop relationships because you may be recruiting them again via the transfer portal. And that's essentially what happened with Jameson Williams. He had Alabama high on his list coming out of high school in the St. Louis area. Ultimately decided on Ohio State, but when it looked like a mutual fit was there, it worked out, I'd say, pretty well for both parties.
Yeah, I would say so.
I've got to ask this about him in his final year at Alabama there too, because I think one of the most fascinating things with the University of Alabama program in the current last few years has been its reputation in the college and SEC system has always been that this is a very hard-hitting team up front. Is going to win in the trenches, is going to hit you very hard on defense. But I think, as far as the NFL is concerned, it's kind of become a new wide receiver U. Most of their biggest recruits are wide receivers. You mentioned John Mechie. We can talk, they've had plenty of players come out from the position in past years too. So and you had Bryce Young, who was, won the Heisman last year. So what really had Jameson Williams? What was kind of that connection Jameson Williams had with Bryce Young that really, like, that quarterback wide receiver connection that really helped him sing?
Well, I think he had obviously just seen, a couple of guys just light it up, and not just those two guys, but the year before you had Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy go in the first round of the NFL draft. So I'm sure that was pretty attractive to him. And you're right, Alabama has shifted more towards a passing game.
We
Some of
haven't
that
even
has to
talked
do.
Devonta Smith. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he wins the Heisman Trophy in 2020. That doesn't hurt. But yeah, I mean, it was an offense that was evolving, I guess you could say. And you could go back to their first national championship under Nick Saban in 2009. That offense had a guy by the name of Julio Jones. So it wasn't like they were running just stalk blockers out there. But in terms of their approach, no doubt. I mean, it was Mark Ingram that won the Heisman Trophy in 2009 for sure, not Julio Jones. But, they kind of bridged that gap with Amari Cooper in 2012. And then, along comes Calvin Ridley, and here comes that 2017 class with Devontae, with Ruggs, with Judy. A year later, you're bringing in Waddle, and it's just rolling. And kind of under the radar there came John Mechie in all that as well. So really, when you look at the quarterback position with Jalen Hurts, Tua, Mac Jones, now Bryce, it makes a lot of sense to throw the football around a good bit more. And Nick Saban's always preached explosive plays. Right. I think he has a reputation of being just a 3 yards in a cloud of dust guy, but he loves the explosive plays, and he's unapologetic about it. There are a lot of old heads, I guess you could say, leather helmet heads, I guess you could say, that they love old Alabama, but it's definitely been a newer brand here in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, I definitely got that sense when oh God, what's his name? I think he's at Ole Miss now. Lane Kiffin was the offensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to be really leaned to, as you said, they always had the explosive plays, but they really leaned into it. But I was kind of at, Jameson Williams himself, was he kind of was that the type that Nick Saban wanted, was the explosive play type? Or was there something where he was kind of more of a just kind of a workhorse too for Bryce Young?
Yeah, I think that they just went through again that offseason after Devontae and Waddle moved on, and they were pleased with what they were bringing back in Mechie, but beyond John, there were a lot of question marks, certainly more than they had at any point since probably 2010 or so. I mean, you got to go 2011. I mean, you have to go back a long way. And so, so they went to the portal. And even though Jameson didn't have the biggest of numbers in 2020 at Ohio State, again, there was that previous relationship there. So they knew what they were getting more so than it would seem in Jameson Williams. And, they needed that sort of 15 to 20 yard per catch guy. And that's exactly what JMO turned out to be, right at 20 yards per catch. And this isn't a guy who did it on 30 catches either. I mean, he had nearly 80 catches and still averaged right around 20 yards per catch.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the previous scouting of him, because I guess that was going to be one of my questions. Is you look at what he did at Ohio State, it wasn't much. I was kind of curious if maybe amongst fans, maybe was there some worry that like this wasn't going to be a move that kind of moved the needle in Alabama? Was there still, I guess, concern on campus that maybe Alabama's receiving corps was lacking that X factor, or did everyone kind of see the forest through the trees, knowing that he's behind Chris Olave, he's behind Garrett Wilson, like there just wasn't room for him at Ohio State?
Yeah, I think that was pretty well understood, but still, obviously, I think Alabama fans were anxious to see it play out that way on the field, and you heard some rumblings last summer that, look, this guy's going to be a starter. He's going to be the starter opposite John Mechie. It didn't take long. And then against Miami, he has the explosive play for a touchdown in the season opener, and pretty much just went from there.
I wanted
go ahead.
I was gonna turn the clock ahead towards the injury, unless you were going to get something.
Well, yeah, I mean, so you find out early that he's going to be a starter. When do you think it clicked amongst maybe the coaching staff, the fans, everyone? When did it click that this guy was something special, like a first round talent special?
Well, I think there was some indications that might be the case even coming out of summer workouts a year ago. But again, it still goes back to production and how is this guy going to respond, once you're actually playing football. But then once fall camp got underway and you had some scrimmage work, 11 on 11, stuff like that, that drumbeat sort of intensified. And then he goes into the season and very quickly establishes himself as, potentially that kind of guy. In a pretty good receiver class, I would say, when you look at it. So there was a lot of positive reviews coming out as early as really the first few weeks that he was on campus.
So second quarter of the college football playoff game, Jameson Williams tears his ACL, exits the game pretty much. I think it was a non-contact injury. Kind of puts a damper on it. As you say, it kind of puts him behind the 8 ball on what was a pretty loaded wide receiver class, be it, Drake London or the Ohio State guys. I guess my question, I guess is a 2-parter, and you can answer the second part first. First part though, how much do you think the injury kind of impacted him going into the scouting season? If you did keep up with kind of the combine and, draft stock and everything, and B, would he have actually run the fastest 40 time ever, as he claims?
Yeah, that would have been fascinating to find out. If you watch him just in terms of on the football field, it's hard to argue against him. We'll never know. Obviously, it's fun to consider, but I didn't really have major concerns. As much as anything, you worried about the timing, because he has the injury the second week of January. And you do the math on combine and workouts and the draft, and you pretty much understand he's going to be out for all that. I think the thing that helped Jameson too, though, was that it's a big red flag. Don't get me wrong, if you have an ACL in January, but I don't think Jameson had anything else in his history, regardless if we're talking tangibly, intangibly, that was going to be a problem for him. Right. So teams look at the tape, and for him, the fortunate thing was there was plenty of it by the time he went down with that unfortunate injury. You pretty much knew what you were going to get. You saw him in really 1.5 games against Georgia make a defense that a lot of people were talking about maybe being among the greatest of all time, really ordinary. Yeah. And so, that worked in his favor, but there's always concern. And you didn't know really the extent. Was it just the ACL, or there's some other issues related to the injury? Sounds like he came through the medical process extremely well, as you guys know. I mean, right. These clubs, they put as much money into that as they do just about anything else in the scouting and evaluation process. So no rock went unturned, and so sounds like he came through it okay.
Yeah. And I one thing we like to do with these podcasts is kind of get to know the person a little more. And I understand, like, sometimes it's not possible. You guys, you only had Jameson for a season. But he's kind of been a tough nut to crack here in Detroit. And, there was some dumb rumblings that he didn't smile enough on draft night and blah, blah, blah. But he's been kind of a low key guy. You mentioned that early on in his time in Alabama, there was already rumblings that this guy might be special. Was any of that on, like, the personality side? What do you know about him as a person that might kind of maybe endear him or inform Lions fans about him?
Yeah, as you said, that the timing of his, the amount of time he was in the program was so brief. It was, I've had layovers in Atlanta that are longer than Jameson Williams was in Tuscaloosa. So, we didn't even have the spring because he came in right after spring. Yeah. So it was really a condensed amount of time. I think if you follow him on social media, you see he's got some personality.
I agree.
He's a hell of a dresser. I'll tell you that. His pregame fit.
He dresses very well.
Yeah, he's going to be top 5 on the team, I bet. And, he's a good teammate by all accounts. He and Mechie kind of came up, I guess, with the crane kick thing that, they were
Karate Kid
widely renowned for. And so he likes to have fun with it. He's just not what I would call gregarious. But, pretty reserved, I would say. But again, we just really, didn't have a ton of time to dig into Jameson Williams, the person. You knew he was a great talent. You knew by all accounts he was a good teammate. Don't think there were really a lot of issues. He plays with so much emotion. That's the one thing that you wondered about at times on the field, and he really expresses himself on the football field. And there's a ton of positives in that. But sometimes before he really settled in, you wondered, okay, he had a drop here. How's he going to respond to that? It seemed like, though, far more often than not, he was just fine. And he was willing to do whatever they wanted him to do. This is a guy who covered punts, so like Devontae Smith the year before. And basically they lost him for nearly 3/4 of the Auburn game because he gets ejected for targeting covering a punt. So I think that kind of speaks to his willingness and, what he's willing to do to help his team.
That's, and at least we know here in Detroit that Dan Campbell thinks that story is more of a positive than a negative, getting thrown out for targeting just because he's willing to be that kind of gritty player.
Playing with passion on the field is like, that's the MO. That's the MO around here. I mean, to the point too about different personalities. I have talked with enough football players like Jeremy. There is something to the idea that like, I think Golden Tate, when I talk with him, he was always talking about like how when he steps on the football field, his brain goes somewhere else. It switches.
Right.
Like some guys just get in the zone like that.
Yeah. Certainly sounds like Jameson's one of those guys. All right, we're going to take our first break. When we come back, we're going to get a little bit more into the technical side of Jameson Williams' games. We all know he's a speedy guy, but what else can he bring to the Detroit Lions? We're going to find out when we come back here on First Bite with Travis Reier of Talkin' Tide Podcast. We'll be right back. All right, let me address the live audience really quick, and then we'll get right back into things,
folks?
Travis.
Hi, Ryan, if he's still watching.
Was Ryan in here?
He was in here for a little bit.
Oh, buddy.
He got to do something to keep Teddy happy while he's there.
Really quick, thank you to Jason D. Walter for the 17-month subscribed. Says, wow, it looks like Ryan had a great baby. He sure did. Derek Boberick with the 15-month subscribed to the channel. Yevitz, I always forget how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. 15 months says confirmed subscribing on Prime works on the phone. You might have to tell everyone else how to do that because I've never been able to figure it out. And then Kza222, thank you for the follow. And we are caught up.
Righteous.
All right. Well, we'll just jump right back into it then.
Mm-hmm.
Give me one sec. And we are back here on First Bite talking all things Jameson Williams with Travis Reier, the senior recruiting analyst for BamaOnline.com. Travis, let's get into it. Like I kind of teased at the top or at the bottom of the last segment, all we hear about is Jameson Williams' speed. And not to say that's not something that's valuable. We all see guys like Tyreek Hill utilize that speed in a very lethal way at the NFL level. But tell me what else he brings to the table, because I know he's more than just a speed guy.
Yeah, I think Jameson probably after the catch doesn't get enough credit. You look at the speed and you see a lot of his clips and they're on vertical throws, and he's basically outrunning a corner, outrunning a safety, hitting a safety with a double move, or outrunning double coverage in some instances, like he did against Georgia in the SEC championship game on the deep ball. But no, I think after the catch he can be better than maybe people are giving him credit for. You saw that against Georgia in the SEC championship game. That was a big moment. They're down 10-0, and he takes kind of this dig route in between a slant and a dig, and he just splits the safety in the corner, and that really ignited the fire for Alabama in that game, and that was largely after the catch. So, no, I think that's an area of his game as a receiver that he can be better than people maybe think. It doesn't just have to happen on plays or throws that you're talking about 40 to 50 yards of airtime for the football, before he's on the other end of it. So, you worry about that part a little bit, maybe more with the ACL, his lateral movement and his cutting ability, and maybe even some of the psychological stuff that goes along with that. But as far as his straight line speed, I don't think that's going to be impacted at all.
Coaches really talked about just kind of again, like we were kind of hitting on it with his personality last segment about kind of that gritty attitude he takes. We talked about some of his special teams play. Do we have any more examples from, I mean, you mentioned fielding punts at Alabama. Do you have kind of any examples of kind of what makes him just kind of sing on that front? I don't think the Lions are really might use him in those positions, but I mean, definitely helps.
Well, I'll tell you, at Alabama, non-negotiable is blocking at the wide receiver position. And again, I don't think that's something he'll probably get asked to do as much. Maybe he will, but
he might.
At Alabama,
I mean, for a Dan Campbell system, probably.
Yeah. I know it's something he'll do, but I know at Alabama, and I'm sure it is in the NFL, it's an absolute non-negotiable. They don't care who you are. If you at least don't have a willingness to block, you will not play.
Right.
And that's why you've seen probably in part some of the transfers out of Alabama in the past, because there's been guys that have been absolutely fantastic, when they're targeted or catching the football or things like that. But there's a physicality to the position that must be adhered to. And again, with the head coach there and, his mindset, his approach, I'm sure that'll translate well. And that's an area where I don't know if Jameson was quite up to the level of, say, a John Mechie in that area, because John had been in the program for 3 years. Right. But I don't think it's a willingness issue either. I think it's something he's more than willing to do.
How would you rate like his hands? Is he a reliable catcher 100% of the time? Is he a guy you're never gonna have to worry about drops? Or you mentioned maybe he had a couple early in the season. You were worried it might turn into a mental thing. Just overall, like, I mean, you've seen so many good receivers go through that program. Where I guess does Jameson kind of rank on that list?
I think some of his issues when he's had them is probably gone back to the emotional aspect and the juice that he plays with. And it had probably more to do with early in games when he was exceptionally amped. But he always responded pretty well to that and would go on to clean it up. But yeah, he had a few drops. And so that's an area that I think, again, he'll improve and become more sure-handed. But he did have, I wouldn't say issues with it, but the Tennessee game I recall pretty vividly. One of the first plays of the game, they throw him an easy hitch and he drops it, but then he pretty much proceeds to light them up. So if you get it out of him early, it seems like he's pretty much okay after that.
Not a case of the yips like let's say some older tight ends that the Lions used to have.
No, not to that extent.
You're really gonna go there on this one, huh? Yeah, no, I know it's a requirement at this point. Even if you don't think it, it's just a meme. I wanted to ask Travis, like the guy who gave Jameson Williams the most problems at Alabama from an opposing side, be it a corner or a safety or someone, was who? What game kind of gave him the most struggle?
Oh gosh. Other than the Auburn game, because he got ejected, it's kind of hard to find one. I'd say Kaiir Elam of Florida did a pretty good job against Alabama in general. Bryce still got his yards, but the yards per attempt, I don't recall being, what they were in a lot of games. So I think Jameson 4 catches, 61 yards against Florida in that game in Gainesville. Otherwise, I don't, Martin Emerson didn't really give him much. Emmanuel Forbes, a couple of really good corners at Mississippi State, didn't hamper him all that much. And, Arkansas tried to play a lot of man coverage against him with their top corner, who I believe signed as an undrafted free agent with the Jags. And I mean, they paid, pretty mightily. I think it was 8 for 190 for Jameson in that game. So, yeah, I think everyone looks at Georgia and kind of thinks it's going to be like Kylie Ringo or, some of those guys. But, he torched Georgia in Atlanta, 7 for 184. He had 4 for 65 before he went out with the injury in the rematch. So I guess I would point more, Sauce Gardner, obviously, is Cincinnati. Yeah. There was a lot of talk after that game, and Sauce is in both those corners. Kobe and Sauce are really good players. Yeah. But
I was going to say Kerry Elam was also I think he went to the Buffalo Bills in the first round as well.
Yeah, he's a first round guy. And so, but game plan was a lot of it against Cincinnati. I mean, if you like old school Alabama, ground and pound, that was the game for you if you're an Alabama fan,
Right.
because they just basically said, Cincinnati's inferior in terms of personnel and their front seven, and this is going to be the Brian Robinson show with the run game. And I think they had their biggest rushing output of the season in that win over Cincinnati in the Cotton Bowl.
Well, okay, so you mentioned Kyer, you mentioned Sauce. Those are two pretty big physical corners. Is that maybe a potential weak point of his game, or was it maybe something specific that Florida did, since maybe they didn't focus too much on the passing game in that Cincy game?
Yeah, it was still a little early when they saw Florida, so
Yeah.
I think that may have had something to do with it. I think it was the third game of the season.
Yeah.
I think when you look at Jameson, you kind of wonder about that, because he's siloey, I guess you could say.
Sure.
He's not Julio Jones in terms of his physical makeup. He's more Devontae Smith for sure in that regard. So he's going to have to be exceptional on his releases, probably more so with his footwork and, his quickness and preparation. He's not probably going to be able to get separation initially, at least, by winning with his hands at the line of scrimmage. And again, that's not because he's not willing to. I think he will, and I think he'll continue to get stronger. So he'll probably develop some of that, but initially, at least, I think that's how he's going to have to win against press coverage.
And then you mentioned like he'll have to win with his footwork. Is that something that you see as strength in his game outside of just the speed? Like, is he a technically sound route runner?
I think he's got room to grow. I don't think he's the route runner that John Mechie was. And something else, I think John Mechie was more instinctive once the play broke down. That's why you saw Bryce Young have this sort of dependency on Mechie, maybe more so when plays were extended. But there was also more of a familiarity there with John, whereas Jameson was still pretty new to the situation. But I think Jameson's capable of that as well. He's, I think in short space before the injury, he was a lot better than people thought, in terms of just throwing him maybe the quick hitch and then letting him do his thing in space against a defensive back. That's where I'll be probably as interested as any other area of his game to see him post-injury, is, again, after the catch, cuts, getting in and out of his breaks, things like that, running routes. But that's something that we won't know, I don't think, until we probably get a good bit into the season.
Right.
I guess last one for me. Just if I was going to rank them as far as who Jameson Williams works closest with when he's figuring things out, we go offensive coordinator, wide receiver coach, quarterback. Like, how are you, like, how closely is he to each of those guys? Because, like, I know for Detroit, for Jared Goff needs to be very comfortable with his receivers. So I'm just kind of curious how closely Jameson Williams works with some of the other staff around him, or is he just kind of like, he reads the playbook, he gets out there, he does his thing, and they just make it work?
Yeah, it's interesting because NFL seems to have taken on some of the college aspect when it comes to off-season work. Like, you see these quarterbacks flying in guys to different locales to work out on their own in the off-season. And that's pretty much the way it's always been in college football, because you have that time in the summer months where it's pretty much on the players, to organize, get themselves together. And that's where you develop those relationships like you do with a Bryce Young. I would say, it starts in the wide receiver room with Holman Wiggins, the wide receivers coach at Alabama, but almost tethered, I'd say Bryce is a big part of that. Bryce isn't very outspoken, or, you don't hear much from Bryce, but by all accounts, he does a really nice job of kind of running that show this time of year. So I would say it's more along those lines. It's become so much like the NFL. I mean, you've got Bill O'Brien as the offensive coordinator and the quarterback's coach, and there's interaction, but they're limited a good bit more. And I know with the situation in the NFL now, they've gotten more and more limited in terms of opportunities to to get together formally and work out and things like that too.
I got two more for you. First, I want to talk about maybe your idea, your projection of what his kind of NFL potential is, because on some level, it does feel like we only got to scratch the surface of what he's capable of, having really only one season as a full starter. So, I guess, what do you think the Lions have in Jameson Williams, and what do you think his ceiling? Like, are we talking about a perennial potential Pro Bowl receiver?
I think he can be. I mean, you guys know so much of it is who's throwing you the football too.
Sure. Yeah.
And can you protect that guy? I mean, so many things that go into it. Yeah, I mean, you put him with Aaron Rodgers, and I can see Devontae Adams,
right?
And Jameson Williams. But there is he enough to lift all boats in Detroit? No, I think they're still going to have to get some help to go with him. And so that's going to be fascinating to watch play out here in the next year or two, where they go at quarterback and just as an organization where they turn and try to pivot to offensively. But the one constant he brings is, the ability to score from anywhere on the field.
Yeah.
So, I just think his presence, even if it doesn't show up as much statistically initially, I think other areas of that offense will certainly benefit from him being there.
Yeah, I thought you said it right at the top. He improves your running game simply by pushing those safeties back, and that's something I know the Lions will definitely be looking
teams
into.
Teams are going to be tempted to press him.
Yeah,
I mean, because you look at him and you think, we'll come up. Okay, well, you better be right. You better get the jam.
Better not miss,
because if you miss, there's no recovery. And I understand it's the NFL, all that.
Right.
There won't be a DB that can recover from that if they're not right at that point.
Then my last question for you before I'm going to let you plug some of your stuff here is, what was his most memorable play at Alabama? What's the thing that if someone was like, I've never seen Jameson Williams play, show me one clip that's Jameson Williams?
Wow. It was a negative, but the damn targeting penalty, it was, because that, you talk about changing a game and just turning it into a 4 overtime prayer fest for Alabama. And it worked out well for Mechie because he became kind of the showcased guy and the hero in the end. But that would be up there. Now, you hate to point to negatives. I think most Alabama fans are going to look at the knee injury, because it came on an explosive play.
Mm-hmm.
Alabama was in a good spot in the game. And, he goes out and the offense, again, suffers significantly because there is no Mechie at that point to kind of carry that load. So, but on the positive front, I think you could look at a couple of catches probably against Georgia. Again, the one in the 10-0 game where it looked like Georgia might, just kind of walk off in that SEC championship game. And, he catches that bullet from Bryce and goes to the house from there. And then he had the other one in the game where, he runs past the corner and the safety. Yeah. Lewis Cine is like a first-round safety.
Yeah.
And he just go back and watch that deep ball. I mean, Cine is playing the deep kind of third there.
Right.
And Jameson just runs right by. and Bryce wasn't worried about Lewis Cine either. He just threw it, because he said if Jamo's even, he's leaving. And he was. And so I would say on a positive front, probably those two.
Yeah. Well, that's Travis Reier. Again, let me give you the floor here to promote your stuff, where Lions fans can find your work, maybe anything you've written on Jameson, or maybe if there's some Lions fans that are also Alabama fans, where can they find you?
Yeah, I had a few Bama players up there in the last few years. It's a pretty good drought, it seemed like, there for a while. I just need to get them to stick around now for a little while.
I already miss my large adult son, Ashawn Robinson.
Yeah, we missed him in Tuscaloosa. He came to Tuscaloosa. He was like 46. So he was about 48, 49 by the time he got to Detroit. No, BamaOnline.com. That's where you can find myself. And we've got a great staff. Tim Watts, Charlie Potter, Kirk McNair, Hank South. It's a fun site. We try to cover Alabama as well as anybody out there, if not better. And I've been doing this for right around 20 years now with BamaOnline.com. So we would certainly appreciate you checking out the website. We're part of the 247sports.com network. Not all that difficult to find.
Awesome. Well, Travis, really, really appreciate your time. Really appreciate the insight into Jameson. I'm sure you'll be checking in, daily, hoping we get to see him somewhat soon. We'll see what the ACL tear, but thank you for joining us and your insight. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next time talking Nathan Hutchinson. But until then, appreciate you listening. It's chaos. Be kind.
Ryan had a great baby.